Okay. Hold on, I just need to change this. Okay. Could you make Izzy the speaker, not me, so you don't have a blank screen with Yoa's name written on it? That's better. Okay. So, thank you everyone, both in the room and at home. I'm delighted to introduce Izzy, who I met when he was doing his master's here at Bristol University. He has a fascinating personal history, which I don't know whether he'll go into in this talk. But what he is going to talk about is how, for most of us, the concept of Yiddish is something you might catch if you're at Golden Street or Stamford Hill amongst Chassidic Jews, but in fact, as I hope you will discover, it's a much more vibrant cultural world out there. And he's going to talk a bit about this. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Job. Thanks, Job. Okay, so a bit of a technical. Well, let's hope we. I just want to make sure I remain inspired, so I'm going to keep myself here and make sure. Okay, there's two audiences here and at home. Okay, so today I'll be talking about what I put in a question mark, as you can see on the screen, a Chassidic cultural renaissance. And it's about Yiddish civilization in the 21st century. So as I said in the byline to this talk, many people assume that Yiddish civilization is something that existed before the war and is now dead. In fact, it's not the case. It's still spoken by roughly 500,000 speakers, and it still gives rise to lots of very interesting cultural expressions. And what we're going to do today is we're going to go through some examples together. We're going to listen to some songs, and we're going to discuss the meaning and the subtleties of cultural expression within this very unique culture. But I'll take you through it, don't worry. And I'm very happy to be interrupted with any questions. If I've made assumptions that people, I've introduced terms that people don't know, just interrupt me. So the art piece on the, let me go back to slide. So this piece you can see here on the slide, this sculpture of a man kissing Philin, is actually a recent sculpture by a Chassidic artist called Zalman Glaube. That's him standing next to the sculpture. It's called Kissing Philin. And this is an art gallery that was opened up in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, where there is a concentration of lots of Chassidic Jews. A recent art gallery exhibiting Chassidic artists. Now, this is very revolutionary. It might not sound revolutionary to the audience, an art gallery. They've been around for a long time. But Chassidic society, the concept of a modern art gallery, you can tell this is a modern art piece. This isn't a traditional piece of art. That's a very revolutionary concept. And so I put it on the title in the beginning of the talk because I want to exhibit, I believe, well, I put it in a question mark, but I believe we're seeing possibly a renaissance, a cultural renaissance in Chassidic cultural expression. And one of the signs, one of the products of that is this art gallery. We're gonna see more about it in a moment. But first, let me introduce the subject matter we'll be talking about today. So we're gonna get some historical background about the development of Jewish culture in general, Jewish Enlightenment culture, and the Chassidic community, because I'm not assuming that people know who the Chassidim are, what the Chassidic community is. We're going to talk about contemporary Chassidic life for a bit, and then we're going to see some cultural expressions in several art forms, and we're going to talk about several themes in Chassidic cultural expression. Now, I told you before the talk, I had in mind to talk about all forms of cultural expression. In the end, there was so much material that I ended up only talking about the music video art form. So see this as a part one, and I've left room for spin-offs. There's a lot to go through, and I want to leave plenty of room for questions, because for me it's very important that all these things, people have different backgrounds of knowledge, so it's very important that people get to ask, clarify, give opinions, free for all. When I was at University of Bristol, I founded the Bristol Free Speech Society. Free input from the audience is very important to me. I have to say, it's, I feel quite emotional being here back in Bristol. I graduated in the summer. and this last summer, I haven't had my graduation ceremony yet because of COVID. But I lived here for 4 years. This is almost like a second home for me. Now I live back in London, and it's really nice to be back. So thanks for inviting me. So let's talk about some historical background. In the 18th century, there's massive changes in the Jewish community of Europe. And there's two opposing developments that immediately go to war with each other. First, there's the development of Hasidism. We're going to talk much more about it. And Hasidism develops in Ukraine, very topical. And the other development that happens also in the late 18th century is the Haskalah, the Jewish Enlightenment. Obviously, this is influenced by secular currents of Enlightenment that happen in Germany. And that happens in the West in Germany. So Hasidism in the East and Haskalah in the West, and they're gonna, in a moment, we're gonna see they're gonna come and clash.
Izzy,
yeah.
Izzy, can I just stop you for 1 minute? We can see your slides, but we can't see you at all.
You should be able to see me because my video is on.
Right. Can other people in the audience at home see Izzy? I can't see Izzy.
No, no, I can't see him.
It
Right.
says it is Yoav's laptop.
Right. I wonder whether it's right.
Go to view options at the top of your screen.
Right. Okay. If you can see it, carry on. It must be something I'm doing. Okay. Sorry. Carry on.
Pin me, Yoav, if you pin me.
Yeah, I've done that.
It's interesting.
So maybe David needs to do that.
Okay, so can we just clarify, can on our screen, is a little box in the right-hand corner with the slides? Is that what you're seeing or not?
Yeah, I'm seeing the slides and I'm seeing a screen saying Yoav, but with no picture of you. And
Because
I haven't got a screen saying Izzy.
the spotlight is on Yoav rather than on Izzy.
Yes.
Fine, is that done it? I just removed the spotlight.
Now you have to add the spotlight on me.
Yeah, I can pin you, so hold on. Spotlight, everyone.
No, it's not the spotlight. It's the screen is black, showing just Yoav. Even though some of us are showing the art there.
Now, you see, when Martin spoke, it showed Martin's screen.
I don't think I've been spotted yet, Yoav.
I thought you did, okay. So if I do that, I've got spotlight for everyone. I did pin you. You see, look, that says remove pin. So that's gone back to David. If I then do pin, I thought that's why it means that you're always on.
I mean, I guess the volume, the voice isn't coming from me because I'm muted, right? So the voice is coming from yours.
Yeah.
Right? So it's showing speaker. You know what I'm thinking? If people
If you put it on gallery view, you'll see Izzy along with some others.
Yeah, we can do that. Does that help?
No, but everyone has to do it at home.
They do so.
Yeah, everyone has to do it at home.
Okay.
So if everyone does gallery
You
view.
don't need to do it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, well, we don't need to do it.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, David, for letting me know, though. I wouldn't want to carry on the whole talk and people not being able to. Is it good now? Can everyone see me?
I don't see you anyway.
That's what I was wondering.
Hi. I just want to keep you on Pesach rolls. All right, have fun. See you later.
Okay, we love you.
See you later, boys.
You can come in.
Trace.
She's such a hard worker. We love her very much.
Ah, it's okay. I've done it. I've done spotlight for everyone. So everyone should be able to see you now.
Well, the power of the Almighty Amazon.
And now I can see the slide.
But several people have now got their microphones on. If you're in the audience, can you please mute? And Izzy, carry on.
Okay, great. So hopefully now it should be sorted. So where was I? Yes, so the Berlin Haskalah, late 18th century, led by Moses Mendelssohn, they advocate an open and modern and integrated Jewish practice. And we'll see the Hasidim want the opposite. And the Haskalah spreads eastwards, right? It spreads eastward over the 19th century. and it introduces waves of reform and secularization and gives rise to the ideologies that were flourishing in the interwar period, which is Zionism on the one hand and kind of Jewish socialism, the Bund, on the other. Now, in the interwar period, a very thriving Yiddish culture emerges. You might be familiar with names such as artists like Mark Chagall, writers such as Isaac Bashevis Singer, who goes on to win a Nobel Prize for his writings in Yiddish. There's theater, there's cinema, all of these things are thriving. So this is a Yiddish culture, a Yiddish civilization. It's all thriving in the language, which was spoken by probably upwards of 90% of the population in Europe, in Eastern Europe, I should say, was speaking Yiddish. And this was a very thriving culture. So that was a development happening on the one side, one development happening in the Jewish community. On the other hand, you have the development of Hasidism. So Hasidism teaches a mystical approach to Judaism. Every Jew can aspire to connect with God in ecstasy through prayer, song, and ritual, regardless of his intellectual abilities. This is a bit of a rebellion against the rabbinical elite that were around in that time. That said that the pathway to God has to be through Torah study. And obviously that left many people out, people who didn't have the time or the intellect to be scholars. And Hasidism gives people an alternative to that. You know, you just have to, it's what's in your heart. You just have to connect to God. You have to be pious, pray to him, sing to him. It's not only about study. There's lots of other ways to connect with God. Now, Hasidism evolved into a form of dynasties. This is quite early on. It evolves where there's these local tzaddikim, these righteous people who lead a court. They're known as the Rebbes, and then Hasidim of the neighboring hamlets and villages and cities flock to them and see them as a gateway to God, almost as a messenger that will take their needs to God. And in the 19th century, when East and West meet, so Hasidism spreads eastward, and the Haskalah, the Enlightenment spreads. Hasidism spreads westward, and the Enlightenment spreads eastward. Hasidism clashes really strongly with these Enlightenment tendencies, and they develop an ultra-conservative ideology in response to that, and that, you know, some would argue that's the birth of Haredism. This kind of more ideologically conservative form of Judaism, you know, which makes sense. You know, before these two movements existed, you just had Jews were just Jews, right? But once a kind of modern Enlightenment Judaism emerges, then those who reject that define themselves by insularity, by not being modern, by not joining the modern world, by resisting that. And a motto that many Hasidim would use is the new is forbidden. Anything new is forbidden. So it doesn't have to be expressly forbidden in the Torah. If it's new, if it's an innovation, it's regarded with suspicion. So in its dress, language, and everyday practices, it attempts to preserve an often mythical past of purity and innocence. We're going to come back to these themes of a mythical past in a moment. And it rejects the wider world in favor of a life of insularity and of self-imposed social and spiritual ghetto. Okay, so let's fast forward. Obviously, you know, the Holocaust happened, wiped out, you know, a large proportion of European Jewry, and the Hasidic community was disproportionately impacted because they were more visibly Jewish, and they weren't involved in the movements that immigrated to America or to Israel. Hasidim were quite suspicious of both. They were suspicious of America because it had a secularizing influence on people, and likewise in Israel. Israel, you know, was a socialist kind of, you know, secular system with kibbutzim. So Hasidim were quite suspicious. They remained in Europe. They were conspicuous, and a lot of them sadly got murdered, and a lot of Hasidic dynasties got wiped out. But today, post-Holocaust, Hasidic Judaism is one of the fastest growing Jewish groups due to high birth rate and high retention rates as well. And it's estimated there are close to 1 million Hasidic Jews worldwide, most living in Israel and in New York. And most of these are Yiddish speakers, by the way. So it's estimated there's around between 500,000 and 1 million native Yiddish speakers currently. Smaller communities exist in London, Manchester, Antwerp, Montreal, and Melbourne. I come from the community in Stamford Hill in London. There's around 20,000 Chassidic Jews there. That's where I grew up. lots of different dynasties, each with their own rebbes. And yeah, I'll just pass through that quickly, don't leave anything out. Okay, so key Hasidic beliefs. So we're going to talk about, hi Ben, hi, thanks for coming. We're going to talk about mainly the cultural expression of Hasidism, but it's important in order to understand the themes and motifs of these expressions, it's important to understand a little bit about this world, how different it is from our world, and then we'll be able to understand this culture and its expression in terms. So Hasidic beliefs are the purpose of the Jew in this world is to serve God, and doing so to restore and unify mystical upper worlds. Hasidism is quite mystical. We're going to come back to that in a moment with some figures we're going to mention that make use of that mysticism in their art. Every action, even the seemingly mundane, has mystical and spiritual significance. The Chassid can liberate trapped sparks, even in the mundane or profane, by channeling them in the service of God. So you might be eating a piece of bread, but because you're eating it to gain strength to then be able to go and serve God, you are elevating these mystical sparks that exist in the bread and are sending them back to be unified with the mystical essence, God. The Rebbe that I mentioned, the Rebbe causes channel to God, the Rebbe can perform miracles and satisfy the Chassid's spiritual and material needs. We're soon going to look at a very subversive Hasidic artist who questions that and says maybe the Rebbe isn't so powerful. We'll look at that in a moment. The secular world has gone corrupt, and so it is the Chassid's imperative to separate himself from it and keep his eyes and thoughts pure. So just a little bit of kind of practices of Hasidim. This isn't an exhaustive list. This can be a talk in itself, but I want to get to the main topic of today's talk. There's distinctive dress and modesty. Internet is highly restricted and censored. We're going to come back to that in a moment because a lot of the examples we're going to look like are found on the internet. So you should be asking, what are these things, these videos, these music, what are they doing on the internet? Internet is highly censored. So we're going to come back to that in a moment. Yiddish is the main spoken language. Very strict gender segregation, which at this point it's worth saying, all the examples I'm going to be mentioning at tonight's talk are going to be from male artists. Women don't have that kind of public platform. Women's voices in singing are considered an abomination. You're not allowed to listen, well, men are not allowed to listen to women's voices. So there aren't, in the mainstream, it's very, very difficult to find online examples of women artists or women singers, songwriters. So all the examples we're going to look at today are men. And I do hope this changes, but for now, that's the reality. So it's worth mentioning at this point. Very large families, okay. Now, what's traditional Hasidic culture? So I mentioned maybe a Hasidic culture renaissance is happening in the last 10 years. So what's traditional Hasidic culture before that? So music is traditionally restricted to what you might recognize as niggins, nigunim. So these are these melodies sang often during religious services or during the Hasidic gathering where men will gather and sing together as a means of worshiping God or a means of kind of connecting to their spirituality. So that's traditionally the function of music. And often every Hasidic dynasties called Hasidic courts. So Hasidic, there's so much to talk about. I can, there's many talks I can give on this, but Hasidic dynasties often function like royal courts, where there's a rebbe who's a bit like a king, and there's a whole host of kind of dignitaries around him, rabbis and so on. And often the courts will have their own singer-songwriter composer to compose this kind of spiritual music, nigunim. Another form of music is also evocative songs in Yiddish or Hebrew about the lives of great righteous people or religious themes. Some examples for those who know a bit. Yom Tov was a very popular Hasidic singer-songwriter in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Moshe Goldman was a bit later. So these are Hasidic people writing songs for Hasidim in a very Hasidic style. So this is not what I'll be focusing tonight. Tonight I'm focusing on a more kind of revolutionary, more kind of Renaissance, boundary-pushing kind of cultural expression. Literature is also often limited to biographies of righteous people, hagiographical renderings of Jewish history. So this is a moral retelling of history for the purpose of making of moral lessons. Examples for those who know is a journal called Malus, a writer called Menachem Mendel. There's many other examples. And art as well art. So in the background here, you can see that's a painting of, does anyone recognize that venue? Yeah, it's the Western Wall, right? And lots of, if you go to a Chassidic home, mostly on the wall, you'll see this kind of art hanging. So paintings either of rebbes, of leaders, or of religious sites. And again, we're going to see tonight that this has been, in the last couple of years, we've seen the emergence of kind of a more progressive art challenging that, kind of expanding the horizons of the subject matter of art. The internet help. So the internet, Hasidic culture after the Holocaust is based, as we've discussed, on insularity and closing oneself off from the influences of the world. The internet comes along. Now everyone can access the world from their room. This is a great danger. This is seen as an existential threat by the rabbinical establishment. In 2012, they gather a rally, 50,000 Chassidim, Haredim, all walks of kind of ultra-Orthodox life, in what they call the Hatzulas Hadoros, so saving the generations. This is a rally, and the picture in the background is a picture of that rally. All the rabbinical establishments, not only in the US, but also around the world, a lot of them flew in, were there to give a unifying voice to saying the internet is an existential threat, and we're here together, 50,000 strong, only men, obviously. So, but all the men will bring home the message home to their wives and children that the internet is a threat, and we're going to do whatever we can to either completely boycott it or only use it very, very, very strictly for work purposes. So not for entertainment, not for anything like that. They introduced a system of censure. So you might be aware that when it comes to eating food, there's a system of hechsherim, where rabbis will rubber stamp food items saying that this is kosher. They've introduced a similar system for technology. Technology now has to have a hechsher. It has to be rubber stamped by the rabbis. So, and what that is essentially a filter that blocks out unwanted influence. And if you violate that, you can risk being kicked out of the community. Your kids can be expelled from the institution. But the internet did prevail. Okay, so this is what we're going to come and see. Lots of examples of a thriving Hasidic culture online. So I wouldn't be able to give a talk if there wasn't examples online. All the examples we're going to see tonight are what I found on YouTube and so on. So this is clearly a thriving culture online. Now, we're going to come to the background photo in a moment. So the internet was just too alluring. Many Haredim, many Hasidim have two phones. One, a kosher phone with a stamp, which they take out in public in the synagogue, and one which they use at home when no one sees. And this is an open secret. Everyone knows this is happening. And it's a secret to the point where there was an extraordinary meeting recently between Yoaz Hendel, the Israeli communications minister, who met up with Haredi rabbis, very influential Haredi rabbis, the big rabbis. And they basically wanted to keep in place a system that enabled them to control the internet use of Haredim, and he wanted to abolish that system. I won't go into the technical details. And he told them, many Haredim have non-kosher phones. You want to bury your head in the sand. And that was a very key moment. It was seen as him standing up to kind of the religious establishment, and the religious establishment wasn't very happy about it because traditionally, in the old Netanyahu regimes, there would be lots of deference towards the rabbinic authorities and kind of new government, because the Haredim aren't in the coalition. The new government is taking a harder approach. And Yoaz Hendel in that meeting, there's videos of that meeting online, if whoever understands Hebrew, he said 50 to 70% of Haredim are connected to the internet. And he told this to the rabbis in their face, which you can imagine how it made them feel. The result is that there's now a wealth of Hasidic cultural expression occurring online, which is where our talk comes into the picture. Let's look at some examples. Okay, so we're going to start with a guy called Lipa Schmelzer. Who's heard of Lipa Schmelzer? Yeah, you've heard of Lipa Schmelzer. This is the BBC has dubbed him the Hasidic Lady Gaga because he wears colorful clothes. This is, he's controversial, but he's a Hasidic superstar. He grew up in a very, very strict village in New York. There's several Hasidic villages exclusively Hasidic, only Hasidic people live live there. And it's very small villages, very, very tightly controlled. They're kind of basically theocracies within America. He grew up in one of the most strict ones called New Square or Square. And they're very strict, very conservative. He grew up there and he rebelled against that. And he started, he's a very artistic man. And he found himself very restricted by the confines of his upbringing. And he decided he's going to do boundary pushing music. We're going to look at some examples in a moment. His music and concerts are routinely banned by the rabbis. There's something called a pashkavil. So this is a notice of a ban notice where the rabbis will put out a statement saying that people aren't allowed to go to his concerts or listen to his music. And obviously he needs to make a living as well. So this is throughout my teens, there'd be a pattern of him, advertising a concert, the rabbi's banning it, him saying, I'm repenting, and from now on, I'm only going to play music that's kosher. And then the rabbi saying, fine, it's fine, you can do your concert. And then a couple of years later, it wasn't enough for him, and he'd start doing kind of boundary pushing music again, and it'd be another ban. And this was a cycle that carried on. He got himself an art degree from Columbia. This is a massive achievement for somebody who grew up in such a conservative insular community, didn't have any secular education growing up, and he got a degree from Columbia, an art degree. So it's truly testament to what a kind of conscientious and strong-willed individual he is. And he opened a shul for people within the Chassidic community. He hasn't left the Chassidic community. He's opened a shul in the Chassidic community for people who kind of, like him, want to stay in the community but push some boundaries. He's an online personality. You can follow him on Twitter, on Facebook. He posts, he's an artist. He makes modern art, which again is very unusual for the Chassidic community. We're going to look at an example of his visual art in a moment. And he inspires and he tries to encourage other Chassidim to also create art like him. So this is a piece of art by a Schmelzer. It's called Kiddush Levuna. Does anyone know what Kiddush Levuna is? You may have heard this Kiddush Levana. Anyone?
Wine.
It's blessing, but not wine. Levana, what's Levana?
White.
Levana, I mean white. Yes, it also has another meaning in Hebrew. It means moon as well. Yeah. And there's a monthly blessing that traditionally you make when there's the new moon on the 15th of the Hebrew month. There's a new moon, and you make a blessing the new moon, and that's called Kiddush Levana. And this piece is called Kiddush Levana. I have no idea why, but I like that it's called that because it makes you think. I don't know why it's called that. I don't know. Bright colors signaling kind of the new moon. I have no idea. But the point is, this is not traditional Hasidic art. This is very boundary pushing. Right, we're going to listen to one of Lipa's songs called Ich hab gehabt, which is Yiddish for I got slapped. Before we listen to the song, because I'm not assuming the audience knows Yiddish, I'd like to tell you what's in the song. So in Hasidic communities, corporal punishment still happens in boys' schools. Boys get slapped by teachers for all sorts of reasons. And this song satirizes how the melamed, which is Yiddish for teacher, hits the kids during difficult Torah portions because they're not familiar enough with the lesson. Now, and the key words I want you to notice is va'ani amishputim. These are names of particularly difficult portions, which he mentions in the song, that during those weeks of those portions, you get slapped more from the teacher. So I'm going to introduce the lyrics first in English so you can appreciate the song, but I'm going to play the song in a moment. So I got slapped for Ba'ani, and then again for Mishpotim. I almost got slapped again at home. So he comes home and he tells his father that my teacher slaps him, and he expects some sympathy that he got slapped. And his father says, your teacher slapped you? He must have had a good reason. I'm going to slap you again. And then slapped once more, once, twice, and thrice. Okay, so let's listen to the song. Let me see if I can find the link. Let's hope it opens right and everyone can hear it. It's on Spotify, yes. Okay, can people see the new screen that opens? Hopefully there's no issue there. Let's try to listen to the song. me a moment. Why it's doing that? Now in the song, he samples, you know how sometimes songs sample sound that aren't kind of pure musical sounds. I'm just going to stop share for a second so I can find the link to this. I'll share in a moment again. So he sampled the sounds of kids being hit by the teacher. So I really want you to listen to this. And in a moment, just bear with me, please. Now work. So listen to him sampling a kid being hit and the interactions there. One. Oh, I've got to share it. I've got to share my screen now again. Oh, that song. Okay, I'm not sure what's happening here. That's a bit of a shame because it's a really nice song to listen to.
We could hear that.
Yeah, but it's not the right song.
Oh, I see.
You can just see at the bottom left, it's saying it's
Yeah, I don't know why that is.
If you click on that, that'll open up a bigger screen. I don't know whether you're then allowed to choose.
Well, that's not going to do for all the songs that I've prepared. Now, there are quite a few songs I want to listen to.
If you haven't got the full version of Spotify, playing random songs from the artist.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Gosh. Okay, well, this is the only song on Spotify. The others on YouTube. So, okay, we're just gonna have to leave this song. It's a shame, but that's what happens when you don't pay a premium subscription. It punishes you.
What's it called, guys?
Ich hab gehabt. Yeah, don't worry about it. We'll move on. There's going to be plenty of other songs, so let's just move on for now. But basically, in the song, he samples the interaction of the teacher trying to hit a child and kind of the child trying to argue back. Yeah, well, listen, there's going to be plenty of other songs. Let's go back to the slides. We'll screen this. On current slide. All right, we're back. Now, he ends the song, the point I want to discuss about the song is he ends the song by expressing, you know, after he talks about the hitting and everything, he says how amazing it was in school and he wants to be back. Now, what's going on here? He just has a whole song saying how he was hit in school, and he's very clear about it. He was hit and it wasn't pleasant, and now he's saying he wants to be back in school. So it might be satire. He might be saying, you know, and in the song he mentions the teacher said that you'll always miss school. So the teacher, after hitting them, said you'll miss school later on. So it might be satire. It might also be a fig leaf. This is a very conservative society. You can't just make a song saying how the teacher hits you. This is complaining. This is criticizing. So you might have to end the song by saying, well, after all, it was amazing and it was fine. Now we're going to see another example of kind of where it's ambiguous whether something is satire or fig leafing. In the next example, the next artist is going to look at. So in this society, there isn't really room for kind of for cultural critique in the way we used to accept the society. There aren't columnists writing about this thing or that thing. There isn't really the phenomenon of putting up a mirror to society where you can inspect societal structures, the power structures, the things that keep things going in society, which create the taboos and the norms of the society. It's always kind of assumed that we're doing everything for religious reasons because the rabbis said we should do things. So when artists want to do cultural critique, they have to be quite subtle about it. And similarly, the art expression isn't meant to be expression about your kind of daily physical embodied life. It's meant to be very much about your yearning for God or your religious experience, that kind of thing. So again, when artists want to create art about the more you know, your daily experiences, your more mundane life. They have to be clever about it. So we're going to now look at an example of an artist. This guy's called Moti Ilovich, and he has a song called Yiddish Tavas, which means there isn't a word for tava in English, which is a shame. Tava is basically a kind of material desire. It's not, I didn't want to use the word lust. Lust has a kind of sexual connotation. Tava isn't necessarily sexual, but it's kind of a material desire. And he made a song. We're going to listen to in a moment of parts of it, so long, so we're not going to listen to the whole thing. And it's basically a celebration of various material desires that appear in Hasidic life. And that's obviously quite subversive. So the way he deals with it, the way he makes his song mainstream, is he says, well, when the Gentiles, the non-Jews have material desires, it's very base and impure, very focused on kind of, he used the word nidrig, lowly kind of pursuits, whereas when a Jew has material desires, that's very different. And he gives examples. So he says a Jew might, Jews aren't allowed to eat meat and milk together. So a Jew might have a piece of steak, but then just before he eats, he realizes he wants a coffee in 2 hours' time. But he won't be able to have milk with his coffee because you have to wait 6 hours between meat and milk. So he calculates when to eat his steak so that he can eat his coffee, when he can drink his coffee when he wants his coffee. So this artist says, well, that's a material desire. You're spending energy thinking about when you can eat your coffee and your meat. But well, where does that come from? It comes from the prohibition of not mixing meat and milk. So you see, even the material desires come from a holy place. Right, let's listen to parts of the song. I also want you to notice the high production quality. This is a really professionally made song in Hasidic Yiddish, which again is gonna tell us that there's an audience for that. People are investing money in that in a music video. If you're not meant to be on the internet, who is watching these music videos? Right, there's clearly an audience for it. So let's hope, fingers crossed, this actually works.
Se sof von em Siede schwiees bei Nacht. Über den Teller Fleisch sitzt der Jid vertracht. Ich gehe dich Handnacht auf sein Sogen ticken. In a pur Schuarem darf ich schon versiegen. Steigt sich als Fahren davenen, a Kave will ich. Aber oi, esse ich jetzt der Fleisch, will ich nicht kennen kein Milch. Der Jid tit quenkeln in Sorgen. Braucht machlet sein, oder Fleisch jetzt, oder a Kave morgen. Lechoire is der Jid stamma baltava. Macht Geschbeunis von Achille, Fleisch oder Kave? Hat aber a gitte Jid maß begewinn a Zoi. Betracht de Chilik en Tavis von a Jid en a Goy. A Goy's Tavis is nidrig, mies en treif. A Jid's Tave is aber gebot auf loise waschel gediebe geleif. Der Jid's Tave kennt a gehoben, Gashmi is de getamem. Aber se schreit heraus von sich, dem Atu bechartuni mikal huamem. Azoi, zi azoi, wus versteigt a Goy. Siz dich Tave, se machsche was li beini, aber du sois burasch moi. Azoi, zi azoi, wus versteigt a Goy. Siz dich Tave, se machsche was li beini, aber du sois burasch moi. Der Zusammenstell von einer Kave mit der Katz gezicke, noch ein Mikve mit der nasse Peies. Der Tave motze Schabes von Zusammenleigen dem Talles, in Tieneppes von Schulen Beies. Der Süßkeit von der Drimmel im Mittenlich und Oidi, es ist besser wie im Bett in Mittennacht. In von Ziegeins im mit in sich Gorgeln beim Bretel, beschaß der Eulem kracht. Eules an Shishi sitzen auf Misrach, schwenden auf der Joine an Oize. Auslassen Tachnen oder überheben dem langen Stickele Joize. Schreien der Erste, jale wie woi, sie sa Simche mamisch amiken weinen. Geis am Masber, Faragoi dem Tam, für machen Kiddisch im Mittenleinen. Sich kennen aufsetzen noch a langem im Koimchu, ziehen dem Talles von dem Korb.
So one of the things he said also is the base desire of falling asleep in the middle of the prayer, right? And it just feels so good. You're sleeping in the middle of the prayer. And well, you're sleeping and it's a base desire, but look what you're doing here, you're praying, right? So it's kind of a new perspective. Now, what's so revolutionary about the song is firstly, the form of the song is, this is not a traditional Hasidic tune. This is a modern pop song. You can hear from the tune, the music is a modern pop song. That's quite boundary pushing in itself. But the celebration of base desires, the celebration of your bodily needs, of your bodily thing, that in itself is revolutionary. Now, I want to unpack a bit what this song is doing. So there's actually quite a bit of racism and Jewish supremacy going on in this song, right? You know, the whole premise is that, you know, a Jewish desire is somehow better than a Gentile's desire. Gentile desire is loading. There's a lot of, you know, that's racist. That's quite disgusting to say, actually. And it's true. It is. This is a widely held attitude in that society, and it's not pretty. I'm not gonna whitewash it. But the reason he is making the focus of this song on this distinction between the Jew and the Gentile is because that allows him to celebrate the Jewish desires. In that society, you can't just make a song celebrating materialistic desires. But because he has said, he's made this contrast that these are holy desires and these are mundane desires, now, you know, he's introduced the religious motif. So my point is, even though this seems like it's for religious motives, this is a boundary pushing song. And I know in the community, the more kind of conservative elements really don't like the song. And, you know, most parents wouldn't let their child listen to a song like this. And as I mentioned, the high production quality, which tells you a lot that there's clearly an audience for this. Now, I want to introduce you to a very radical Chassidic artist, fascinating figure. This is a very mysterious figure. And I'm going to tell you a lot about this man because I think he's a fascinating man to get to know. He's called Mendel Roth. And he came up with a song called Mincha. It has 1.5 million views on YouTube. And it's a song in Yiddish. So 1.5 million views on YouTube for a song in Yiddish, when there's less than a million Yiddish speakers, it tells you something. He has an audience. This man has an audience. We're going to listen to this song in a moment. But first, I want to tell you a bit about Mendel. So he's the son of a Chassidic Rebbe. His father is a big Rebbe. And this is a big dynasty called the Shomer Aminin dynasty. This is the kind of, you know, on the spectrum of Chassidic dynasties, this is kind of as extreme as it gets. Okay, so this is a dynasty. His grandfather, the founder of the dynasty, was obsessed with sexual puritanism and with isolationism, and had a very mystical way of looking at the world. And it's going to affect this Mendel's art. Very, very fascinating. So this is the most conservative element in the Chassidic community. And in it, there's a guy called Mendel who still wears the full Chassidic regalia, but he's a maverick. It's not enough for him. It's the confines of his society aren't good enough for him. He really wants to experiment. He really wants to push boundaries. And he's on social media and he shares his insights, and he has a dedicated following of people who kind of are in that society but want to feel more, want to do more. So let's look at this video. This is called Mincha, and I want you to notice, firstly, this is a really, really high production. This is an epic. We'll look at it in a moment. They recreated the whole village for this video. Let's first watch a bit of the video, and then we're going to discuss some motifs appearing in that video.
Der heilige Baal Shem hat amul gesucht. Kriegt von a Yid in mitten Mahal, schon spät in Minche, dus kriegt allein, spalt alle Himmel. Bis wie lang kann man davenen Minche, bis wie lang kann man davenen Minche, bis wie lang kann man davenen Minche, oi Minche. Bis wie lang kann man davenen Minche, bis wie lang kann man davenen Minche, bis wie lang kann man davenen Minche, oi Minche. Man jeder gedenk, de Zeit ist in seiner Hand, de Bäuer steht im Wald, de Teuer ist noch nicht verspart, nein, mein Kind, kim davene Minche, man jidele gedenk, de Zeit ist in seiner Hand, de Bäuer steht im Wald, de Teuer ist noch nicht verspart, nein, mein Kind, kim davene Minche. Wie lang kann man davene Minche? Bis wie lang kann man davene Minche?
Leave it here for now. So, firstly, this is a bit of a recreation of Fiddle on the Roof, isn't it? It's a shtetl. Yeah. In Chassidic folklore mythology, the shtetl plays a larger than life role. It's a harkening back to this perfect and pure past where Jews were simple. Jews were just serving God, just working and doing their own thing, and he's going back to that in the staging, in the cinematography of this video. But again, this is a high production video. There's an audience for this. There's 1.4 million views on YouTube, and this is the son of a rebbe, and he's acting in it. The guy you saw acting, that's him, Mendel. He's acting. He's a Chassidic actor. You're not meant to be a Chassidic actor. That's not what you're brought up to do, especially if you're the son of a rebbe. You're meant to be a scholar, you're meant to be a Rav, he's an actor. So this is very, very boundary pushing stuff. And this is all of the examples we're looking at are just the last decade. This is a new, that's why I call it maybe a renaissance. I put a question mark, I don't want to make big statements, kind of not a historian, a scholar, or something like that, but there seems to be something is happening in the landscape. Let's get to know Mendel Roth a bit better. So I wanted to first give you an example of the person and his art before I tell you a bit more of his darker side. So I wanted to give you a chance to kind of see this side before we make maybe some judgments about him. So Mendel is a guy, I follow him on Facebook, he writes a lot. He really, really grapples with where he is in society, with the way he was brought up, the suppression he had to go through, and his big heart. He feels immense longing towards something, connection, romance, to break out of his confines. But he finds himself in that community. And this talks to me on a very personal level. I also grew up Chassidic. I left that community. Not everyone can. He didn't leave. He's there, but he's trying to make a space for himself in that community. And he had a very, very intense upbringing. You can see him writing about his upbringing and how he spent every second of the day suppressing his urges, suppressing his sexual urges, any kind of urges, and that left a mark on him. And now he's a more open person, and he's struggling what to do with it. And it took him in a strange direction. So he exhibits bipolar tendencies online in his writings, and I'm saying this not because I'm being voyeuristic. He writes very, very openly about his life, and he sees himself as a figure. He sees himself as a leader, as a role model. He wants people to discuss his life. What's that?
Sorry, it's just to say if you have questions, put it in the chat.
Oh, brilliant. He experiments a lot with psychedelics. Okay, this is again very boundary pushing. Hasidic man to do that kind of, in any society it's quite boundary pushing, but especially Hasidic society. And now you can imagine he combines that with his mysticism, a very intense mystical outlook. And he doesn't see himself as having bipolar. I think if he would be diagnosed, he would be diagnosed with bipolar. That's very clear from his writings. He doesn't see it that way. He has mystical ways of connecting. There's the dark forces and the pure forces. Very, very fascinating figure. And maybe perhaps most controversial of all, he exhibits antinomian tendencies. So antinomia is when you say that maybe the letter of the law doesn't matter as much as the spirit of the law. Okay. And in Haredi Judaism, that's heresy. The letter of the law matters. And he kind of plays around with the boundaries. He says, well, I really feel romantic towards a woman, I might want to do something. Well, he doesn't actually violate the law, but he kind of plays around with that a lot, makes him very controversial. He's expressed messianic tendencies. and he believes himself to be a reincarnation of Shabtai Tzvi. So that's the false messiah, Sabbateanism from the 16th century. He believes himself to be a reincarnation. It's very, I have a great interest in kind of that part of Jewish history, and I've read quite a bit on Shabtai Tzvi, and the way he talks and behaves, like he really exhibits those kinds of. Shabtai Tzvi was also believed to be bipolar and also had Mashiach tendencies, and so it's easy to dismiss him as just another disturbed soul. He's incredibly insightful, profound, and charismatic. You see, he has a video with 1.4 million. Yeah.
If ever feels, how can soul be a reincarnation of a false messiah?
He doesn't believe that Shabtai Tzvi. So he believes that Shabtai Tzvi, he was a false messiah, but there was sparks in him of true messianism. So the reincarnation. So he is born again to kind of fulfill what the Shabtai Tzvi couldn't do himself. So in kind of Jewish mystical thought, people can have a purpose that they don't quite fulfill, and then they have to come back again to fulfill it, right? So, if you're reincarnation, so he believes Shabtai Tzvi wasn't just kind of an evil heretic, he was the person who had a true message, he just didn't fulfill his potential. Now, I see in Mendel, the reason I brought him up, you don't know who Mendel is, but I follow him very closely, and he's a person with great influence and is doing quite radical things. I think we are going to see great things coming from this person. So, historically in Jewish society, people like Mendel are the ones who birthed new movements. The Besh, the Baal Shem Tov, who birthed Hasidism, was a figure, a kind of mystical figure like that, Shabtai Tzvi, and I believe that Mendel has those tendencies. And I'm just watching him and following him very excitedly. So that's why I'm sharing. And all I'm saying is, you've heard it here first, okay? Now, the most radical thing he does, and it's happening right now, he's right now working on a Chassidic love song, okay? Now, you imagine how radical that is, a Chassidic romantic love song, a love song towards a woman. This is not allowed in Chassidic society. That's the worst thing ever. You can't express romantic love. I mean, the separation of the sexes is absolute. Even talking about a woman is taboo. Imagine expressing love towards a woman. The son of a Rebbe, Chassidic dynasty, and that's what he's doing. We're going to listen to the love song. It's not yet produced, it's not yet out, but he gave us a glimpse of his studio recordings, which I want to share with you, and we're going to look at that, and it's just fascinating. This is the cover of the song. Now notice, so it's called Liebeling, that's Yiddish for love song. Just saying the word Liebe in Yiddish is so radical. It's radical. You're not meant to express those kinds of feelings. And on the cover, you can see the silhouette of a woman. That's the silhouette of him, that's him, and there's a silhouette of a girl. And in Chassidic culture, whoever knows, we don't have pictures of women at all. Even a silhouette you don't have. So, all of this is just radical, which makes me very excited. Yeah, I'm going to say it again, Chassidic love song in Yiddish. This is huge. When I heard this, I was like, wow. Yeah, you don't talk about the opposite sex, certainly not in a romantic way in Chassidic society. So let's, I'm going to first expose you to the lyrics in English so you can appreciate the song as he sings it. We're going to watch him sing it in the studio. So he says, Adam loved Eve. King David sang to Bathsheba with great love. I too want to love a Jewish girl. And this is a cry from his heart. He's saying, my society isn't allowing me to love a woman, and I want to love a woman.
Is he married?
He's not married. He's not married.
He's usually married at very young age.
Yes, but he's a pariah. He's a very kind of odd kind of fella. And I don't think he would want, the traditional Hasidic girl. That's not what he would want. He wants somebody who's independently minded, who can kind of tolerate his outpour. He has a massive soul. The way he talks, the way he sings. There's so much soul there, and not every Hasidic woman can tolerate such a man. And he's not only talking about himself either. He's talking for a generation. He's talking for all. Yeah.
Well, I'm really interested in this actually. I mean, what you're describing here actually is the limitations of Yiddish, because I've got some experience of working with the Chassidic community of magistrates, psychologists, and therapists. One of the difficulties I always faced was that when I tried to explore with them how they understood things in Yiddish, there was no language, there was no words to describe things like sexuality, child development. So it was, so kind of therapy was really quite an alien sort of concept. But I mean, what you're describing here is a man who's seeking to extend the boundaries. But he's trying to do it without the sort of language, unless I'm wrong, really, that will allow him to engage in that thinking, because it's the language that allows the thinking. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what's your name?
Pardon?
What's your name?
Ray Wolf.
Ray Wolf.
Yeah,
I'm just
my
going to
parents
repeat.
spoke Yiddish, but
I was going to repeat the question because I was told the audience might not be able to hear. The audience at home might not be able to hear
Yeah.
the question. So the question that Ray asked, was that there isn't even the language perhaps for romantic love, and that's absolutely right. There isn't the language. That's why I said even saying the word Liebe, that kind of makes me uncomfortable, because the word Liebe, it means love. It's borrowed from German, but it's not a word that you'll use in Hasidic Yiddish. So yes, you're creating the vocabulary as well. Now, let's listen to the song. Let's listen to the song. It's not released yet. This is a song, this is hot off the press, you know, this isn't a song that's released yet. He's in the middle of creating this song. I'm just super excited by it. And you see, this is a man singing, he's singing from his heart, you can tell, right? Even without understanding the lyrics. And he's saying, you know, all these biblical figures, they could love. The Bible is full of love. Why can't I love? You know, that's what he's saying. And he's speaking to a generation, and it touches me on a very deep level. Now he adds, it's important to add, firstly, you heard the tune of the song. Unlike the songs we heard earlier, this is a traditional Chassidic thing, okay? There's only so much you can play with boundaries. If the subject matter is kosher, you can play around with the tune. If the subject matter isn't kosher, you better have a kosher tune, okay? That's what he's doing here. But there's another element to it. For him, romantic love isn't a sexual thing as it might be in kind of sexualizing pop, in secular pop culture. For him, this is a very deeply mystical person. He genuinely believes that love between a man and a woman symbolizes mystical things. It's love. In Jewish mysticism, God is two parts. I mean, you're going to tell me there's monotheism. Anyway, in Jewish mysticism, God is two parts. There's God and there's the Shekhinah, and they kind of operate like a husband and wife, and there's kind of romance between them. And he genuinely believes that when he feels romance for a woman, he is tapping into that mysticism. For him, he takes it very seriously. For him, it's a genuine mystical thing. And he also mentions towards the end that, you know, this is about building also a Jewish home and having Jewish kids. So he is kind of trying to make it kosher, but there's no way. I mean, this is going to be super controversial when it comes out. There's going to be the bans I mentioned against other artists. There's going to be plenty of those against this song. Okay, the song doesn't yet exist, and I know there's already people writing bans about this. Okay, we're getting to our final artist we're going to talk about today, a guy called Sholi Grossman. Now, just from looking at the art, you can tell, this is a picture of him, you can tell this is a guy who likes to push boundaries. So he has the traditional strum, the Chassidic hat, but the rest is not traditional Hasidic. You know, he's playing around with it. It's a good look, it's a great look, but he's expressing individuality and creativity. And this is, in my opinion, he is the most boundary push Chassidic artist. So boundary pushing, they actually have to leave the community. He's not in the community, but he's still creating art in Yiddish with Hasidic themes, which is why I still consider him part of a Hasidic cultural expression. So he left the fold, so he's less constrained, so you'll see him pushing the boundaries in a more explicit way. And his work explores all kinds of themes, including kind of quite heretical themes like questioning rabbinical authority and drugs in Yiddish. Hasidic song in Yiddish about getting high. We're going to listen to that song. That's the song we're going to listen to in its entirety. So he rose to prominence. He wrote the parody of Nickelback's Rockstar. Does anyone know Nickelback's Rockstar? Yeah, the young people know the song. So it's basically, I want to be a rock star. So it's basically kind of a song about the lifestyle of a rock star, and he's saying, I want to be a rock star. I also want to ride these limousines and have these girls and everything. And he wrote a parody of that, Ich will sein ein Rebbe. Okay, so basically the superstars in Hasidic society are the rebels, and I want to be a rebel, like I want to be a rock star. It's worth watching a bit of that video. I know we're getting towards the end of our time, but it's worth watching a bit of that video because that's genuinely heretical stuff.
Alle will sein größer Abunem, was kicken oben und herab auf die Batlunem. Hey, yeah, ich will sein a Rebbe. Ich bin geendigt mit dem Gein in Läufen zu Tischen, sich schockeln noch paar Inches und Condition, sich schlugen in Schwitzen zu sehen, wie der Rebbe esst. Geniegen mit sich beten bei der Rebbes Gabe, soll mich lassen herangehen, Maske an der Babbe, der Rebbe ist busy, der Präsident ist du vergesst. Ja, ins alle will sitzen mit der Scheine Jiden, beim Misrichwand mit der Bauch zufrieden, wie der Brochen die sich, der Geld im Grimm, mit Scheine Wasser wird, nach halt sich jing. Ja, ins alle will sein, größer Abunem, was gibt Neuben und herab auf die Batlunem. Hey, yeah, ich will sein a Rebbe. Hey, 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 ich will sein a Rebbe. Ich will a hooked up carry, the latest upgrade mit lederne seats, custom made up with cherry.
You get the idea. So this is saying the rebels are living their good life, they're living in luxury, they're living with all these nice clothes and all these butlers looking after them, and they don't really care about us, you know. So you can imagine how popular this made him in Hasidic society. Now he carries on creating music, Jewry. We're not going to have time to listen. On YouTube, you can literally, if you Google Jewry, spelled like that, Jewry, you can see his channel. He uploads roughly once a month. Quite really well done. He has a very interesting style. Often it has subtitles, which can help you go along, and they're always boundary pushing. They always explore some typical aspect of that society. Which again, in a society, you know, it might, again, living in secular society, this might not seem like a big deal. You know, we're surrounded by people creating satirical music, and in Chassidic society, this is incredibly rare, which is why I'm so excited about this. So he has a song, A Shiny Yid, a Noble Jew, which we're not going to listen to it, which it has subtitles. If you want to go listen to it, you can. Which basically is a story of this comfortable, you know, financially comfortable Jew who kind of loses his fortune. He comes to the Rebbe asking for help, expecting that the Rebbe will be able to lend him some money because the Rebbe is quite rich. And the Rebbe says, I'll pray for you, I'll give you a blessing. And then he becomes homeless. But he says, I still have to believe in the Rebbe. So it's very kind of heretical stuff. He made a song about the war in Ukraine. Again, we're not going to listen to it because I want to have time for questions as well. But this we are going to listen to. And Yoav, can we have the lights off, please? And I invite everyone home also to switch off your lights. So this is a song in Yiddish about getting high. It's my favorite song of his. Without giving away too much information, I've listened to this song as intended several times. And it really takes you on a ride. The motifs it touches upon, it basically takes you into a mythical universe of Chassidic folklore. Chassidic folklore, there's several there's villains and heroes. Every Chassidic kid knows this. Every person who grew up Chassidic has encountered these stories in Chassidic folklore. There's Moshka, who is the Arendator, so he's the pub owner. There's Alexei, who's always the coachman who drives the Rebbe. There's the Puritz, so he's kind of the nobleman who owns kind of the serfs. And this song is going to take you on a journey. It's called Ride With Me in Yiddish. So let's just sit back, try to relax, and just enjoy the song. Can we raise the volume, Yoav? It's got subtitles as well, so you can.
Ich bau mir ein Haus tief in der Himmel, weck dich auf Scholi, seit sie herabkommen, kennst an der Weg werden eigens nicht umkommen. Ride with me, kein Cheshbonin, not Ziel. So ride with me. Cruisen, chillen, fuhr mit mir. Surely. Lande groen auf den linken Saal. Zinde Sonne, lass Arrow stehen. Lass aus den Lights, sei besser still. Netflix und chill, ich beginne die Zahl. Morgen wird kommen, dasselbe Stissen, selbe Sache, noch einmal so Beutel beschischen. Kall Hakula koitisch, kenn sich kischen, alle Ballachoi, bis sich interwischen. Hassel, Schleppes, Zipp gesinnt, flieh weg die Blätterlach, in der Wind. Stadelig wie Gewalletjes, Wasser in, zerbisselig wie Fischelig in Jammerschwind. Ride with me, kein Cheshbonin, not Ziel. So ride with me, cruisen, chillen, fuhr mit mir. Maybe I'm building a castle on the sky, drifting away like the clouds of our days gone by. Maybe the song in my head is a lullaby. Ride with me, kein Cheshbonin, not Ziel. Lande groen auf den linken Saat. Alulke schlepp, flieh weg, wart. Alexa wird an der Ballagule. Das Sarah Maschkende, Pusse Chulam. Wuchs die Arende zerreben gefuhren. Golde endlich kennen, ich bazulen. Ha, 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 wie Robert zu lacht. Der Puritz gepeige die nächste Nacht. Maschke ist freilich, Lechaim singt. Wir sind gleich mit dabei, auch hat Tränen so. Los es sich ein, ja, los es sich rein. Ja, wenn ich verstein, just ride with me. Ride with me. Kein Cheshbonin, not Ziel. So ride with me, kein Cheshbonin, not Ziel.
Clearly not a traditional Chassidic song. I think
the lights take a little while to.
I actually thought we'd leave it off, but part of what talks to us about pop culture is its reference to the familiar moments in our upbringings, to the early experiences that formed our world. A new burgeoning genre is emerging to fill that void in Chassidic culture. People want more than the religious songs. They want something to talk to them about the mundane, the everyday, the human experience. A new generation of artists rising to the occasion and it's exciting to see where and how far they will take this. All of these efforts, however, are met with stiff resistance from the establishment. These artists get banned and censured, their art is inaccessible within the mainstream. And yet these influences seep in. Song by song, stanza by stanza, they drip inwards. Even if their origins are on the margins, inevitably they become part of the story and evolution of Hasidic society. There's no doubt in my mind that history will remember them. Thanks for coming to my talk. Very happy to take questions now. Just give it a moment.
Oh, yeah.
So,
So we have some questions in the chat, but we just start and see if I can get this to work. Yeah, so my camera now is not saying go, I'm showing people in the room. Is there anyone in the room who would like to ask any questions to Izzy first? And David, when someone asks a question, just let us know if they can be heard or we need to repeat it.
Okay.
I'll just, can I say something? Thanks, Izzy, that was fascinating. I huge number of things. I thought I knew a little bit, but there's a lot, huge open my mind to things. But of course, what I did find, and I suppose inevitably missing, is the woman's voice. It's just not there at all. And I just wonder if any of this is impacting on women in that community. And I hope it is, but I have no idea, who knows? And I guess you don't know that either.
exactly, that's a very good question. So I'm going to repeat the question. What was your name?
Karen.
Karen asked, where are the women in this? It's a very, very good question. And it's a question that needs to be asked. There's two parts to my answer. The first part is, this is such a gendered society that I have no idea what it's like for women, because I didn't grow up in their society at all. The society is so gender separated that it's almost like we grew up in different societies to some extent. Obviously, I have a relationship with my mother, my sisters, but I don't know the women's experience very well, so I can't really talk about that. That's one thing. The second thing is women don't have that much of a voice as men have. Men, even though we've seen the constraint, and they have to come up with clever ways to push boundaries, they have a voice, they don't have a platform. Women don't really. There aren't Chassidic singer-songwriters. Their music doesn't make it online. So I don't have much to showcase. But yes, I really...
So just to add, we did have Karen Skenazy, who you probably know.
Yes.
Who, in her book, Women of Valor, does talk about these exceptional cases, particularly women filmmakers. There are several Haredi female filmmakers, and the scripts have to be authorized and blessed by the rabbis, of course, first. But there is a creative niche, but perhaps not musically. Maybe that's more difficult.
Yes, and also it would be quite difficult to access these online, because if women are acting in them, they'll be very, very particular about selling them only to women, because they don't want it to fall into the hands of a make and watch.
She made that point. They're only available within the community, so they're for the community by women in the community, but outsiders like us would not be able to access them.
Yeah, very good question. Yeah.
Anyone else? Sorry, you wanted to ask? Yeah, I think you're next.
Hi, thanks so much for that, Izzy. That was really interesting. I thought that outro was really beautiful as well. What I wanted to ask was about specifically the last song in Shawnee's music is that Ryan it's basically indistinguishable from a lot of pop songs, especially the kind of foreign language and English mashup ones that are just popular in the charts, even in the charts today. How long do you think it's going to take for these kinds of more radical and revolutionary kinds of music to start influencing the music that kind of, like you're saying, the rabbis, like only singer-songwriters? Do you think it's ever going to influence those people? And so how long do you think it's going to take?
Great, so Ben asks, are these, these are on the margins, how long is it going to take before they seep in, before they influence the mainstream? It's impossible to say prophecy about the future. There's always an influence, things trickle in. It might be subtle, right? It might not be completely obvious, things trickle in, okay? So your friend's neighbor hears them and, he's hearing a nice song and passes it on to you. And yes, you shouldn't be listening to it, but you do. These things trickle in, they have an influence inwards. And you know, a very funny thing about Hasidic music, there's some mainstream Hasidic songs that are completely kosher, that are just basically rip-offs of completely secular pop songs. So, you know the song Baby I'm Worth It? There's a Hasidic song, mainstream, sung by all Hasidic weddings, that's just a rip-off of that tune. And it's kosher because people don't know where it comes from and what the original lyrics are, right? So things seep in. And these artists, they do have an influence, and it also means that people inside who want something more can access it. So they might not be able to listen to it in the synagogue or, you know, tell the dad that they're listening to it, but they can listen to it. And it gives expression to all these feelings that isn't expressed in the mainstream Hasidic songs. So is it going to change the mainstream? I don't know. How long will it take? I don't know. The Hasidic mainstream is really, it's very, very guarded. It's a system set up explicitly to cut out the outside world. Will that, I don't know what will happen. It's impossible to say, but what is happening is the margins are growing. So there's more gray. So the mainstream is staying the mainstream. If anything, the mainstream will become a bit more extreme and insular, but the margins are growing. There's more room on the margins for people who want to experiment. So maybe in 10 years' time, people like myself don't have to leave. They can just live on those margins.
David, do you want to ask people on Zoom?
We've got one question from Judith Stavrakakis. So Judith, do you want to unmute yourself and put your camera on, and you can ask Izzy the question direct?
Hello?
Yeah.
Hi. I was just interested in the relationship between the average Hasidim and the Rebbe, because initially you said that in contrast to more intellectual kind of Judaism, the whole point is that there's a direct link between the person and God. That's a direct link. You don't have to study Torah for that. It's a direct link. But at the same time, you have these very powerful rabbis. And from the way you're talking about it, it's almost sort of idolatry that you have to go through the rabbi to get to God. It's almost like the Catholic priests in a way that, you know, there is that. So isn't that a contradiction?
That's a brilliant question, Julia. Thank you. So I'll say two things in response to that. Firstly, and this is a general lesson about social change, all good movements that start with good ideas end up being corrupted, right? Because humans are complex and there's always, you know, and somebody might start a good idea, but the next generation is still interested in power and influence and money, right? So, you know, the Chassidic movement may have started with a very egalitarian idea, but it didn't take more than 2-3 generations before these people at the top decided, you know, why shouldn't we get the power and the money, right? So that's kind of one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is that through the Rebbe, I mean, so again, everything we can look at with different perspectives. So, and I'm going to say something contradictory to what I just said, but that's okay, because life is messy and complex. So another way of looking at it is that through the Rebbe, the Chassid gains his relationship with God. So yes, you know, in a sense, the power is concentrated with the Rebbe, but the Chassid himself doesn't have to be scholarly. He doesn't have to have a position. When he comes to the Rebbe, he can feel that he's with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe is already taking care of his spiritual as well as physical needs. And there is a Hasidism, even to this day, I should add, you know, there's still non-Hasidic Haredim, and the Lithuanian, the literature, and the yeshiva, which still put the primary emphasis on Torah study. And it is very difficult if you're not of an intellectual bent, if you want to go out and work, it's very difficult. You can be, you know, it's a big taboo. In Hasidic society, to this day, there is a kind of more egalitarianism. Well, egalitarianism is pushing it too far, but there is a kind of element that you don't have to be a great scholar yourself. You can participate in these songs. Everyone can sing. Well, no, that's not true. I can. Not everyone can sing. But everyone can participate in the song. Everyone can eat food. Everyone can come to the Rebbe and feel like a part of the community.
Okay, thanks.
Liz Cashton, you posted on the chat room a comment. Do you want to make the comment to Izzy direct and talk?
Okay, yes. Have you noticed that this audience is at least 75% female? What are we supposed to think? How are we supposed to react? What have you got? Can you say to us as females with Yiddish in our blood and music in our blood and Judaism in our blood, where do we go? How do we receive all this male nonsense?
Liz, Karen has raised the question about the kind of gender representation in this talk, and I take that that's a very good point, and I'm glad it was raised. Thankfully, the music, I think, I hope, has a universal nature to it. We can all listen to the music and appreciate it, even if it was made by men. It's not only
we can all listen, but where are the female voices?
That's a great question. In Chassidic society, women aren't really meant to be talking in a platform where men can listen to it, right? So by definition, any platform where I have access to, women would try not to upload their voices there, right? So women do have places for women where they gather in women-only spaces, but that wouldn't be released online, and they wouldn't create music for a wider audience. So the women voice does exist for women, but it's not something that's accessible to me or to any of us, frankly.
David, I think we probably need to, because of time, wrap up. I don't know if there's any burning last question. If not, then I'd be very grateful if us in the room can clap and people online can do their clapping emojis, and thank Izzy very much for his talk. And David, if you stop the recording, and I'm going to press the leave button, so we're all going to disappear in a minute, unless you're in the room with us, in which case we can have some tea and biscuits.
Thank you very much, Izzy.
Bye.
Bye.